On today's episode of the Locked On Knicks podcast, we make some bold predictions for the final third of the season. Can the Knicks ascend into a top 10 defense with Mitchell Robinson? We talk about it next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Gavin, Schall, your Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast and a credentialed media member covering the league for the last few years. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of the Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrick.land. And of course, this is Locked On Knicks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving you the most detailed insights on your favorite team 5 days a week. And be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans and subscribing in both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team. But if you're a real sicko and that's not enough for you, well, we have some good news. Your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. We're introducing Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, the one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Knicks newsletter. You get writing from Alex and I, our fantastic team of national writers here at Locked On. Of course, Josh Lloyd giving you the latest and greatest in fantasy basketball. On today's show, bold prediction time for the final third of the season. We do it before the year. Sometimes we do it earlier. We didn't this year. And then we do it late season, post All-Star break, heading into the playoffs. Will there be a starting lineup for the Will there be a starting lineup change for the New York Knicks? Can they reclaim their old identity as a top 10 defense with Mitchell Robinson back? Will they have multiple All-NBA guys? Could they actually go ahead and surpass the Boston Celtics and get a top 2 seed? We're going to get into all of it, but Alex, where do you want to start?
Well, it's been teased, but I'm gonna start on the defense. So my bold prediction is that the rest of the way out, the Knicks are a top 10 defense. So the measure that I generally go with is points per 100 possessions. It's kind of everybody's go-to stat if you just need a quick catch-all. It evens out for pace and everything. So slower teams are traditionally going to give up less raw points per game, whatever, but points per possession, points per 100 possessions gives you an idea of everybody on the same playing field per every 100 possessions. What does the team let up? The Knicks right now, as we hit the All-Star break, I did not realize quite how far they had slipped. They are actually at 20th in the league right now at 115 points per 100 possessions per Basketball Reference. I guess they're technically tied for 19th. But yeah, them and the Brooklyn Nets of all teams are tied at 115 points per 100 possessions right now. That said, the margin to move up 10 whole spaces is 2 points. So 2 points per 100 possessions difference. They can move all the way up to where the Detroit Pistons are at 113 points per 100 possessions. That would officially make them a top 10 defense in terms of points per 100 possession or net rating, or I should say defensive rating is sometimes, how that's categorized depending on where you get your defensive rating stats from. But the big, addition here obviously is Mitchell Robinson and OG Anunoby. I mean, it shouldn't be discounted. They've been without him for a few games, and it's been a little rough. They've still done fairly well without him, but still worth noting that they've been without OG, and he's a key part of what they hope to do going into the postseason. But Mitchell Robinson will be a huge addition, especially if, and I mean, just from looking at him, he looks like he's in really good shape right now. From what everyone is saying within the organization, the beat writers, Mitch himself, all kinds of people, he is in some of the best shape of his NBA career right now. It bears reminding the Knicks were 9th in defensive rating last year before Mitchell Robinson went down. And then in that time from the Mitch injury in December until when OG Anunoby showed up, they were 26th. So similar results to where they're at right now. They were a little worse. I mean, there were times where I think for like a 5 to 7 game stretch, they were like 30th in the NBA during that time. right after Mitch got hurt. And you and I know we're really worried about that a little over a year ago now. But yeah, I think Mitch coming back is going to be huge. It's going to give them that more traditional rim protector that Tibbs likes so much. It's going to give them the opportunity to go to that lineup off the bench. It's going to give them an opportunity to have Cat out there to space the floor and have Mitch out there, hopefully, for some of the lineups and try to recreate some of the Gobert type magic from Minnesota. But yeah, all in all, I think I looking at the numbers and looking at it in terms of just what the margin is on the points per 100 possessions, I don't think it's a stretch to say that just adding Mitch to this team will get the Knicks back 2 points or perhaps even more than 2 points per 100 possessions the rest of the season out.
Yeah, I think it's fair to make that argument. I think we still have to see what version of Mitchell Robinson we're getting, and I know there's been some inconsistency in terms of the reporting of when he's coming back. I know Shams Charania had that, like, he should be back, like, if I'm remembering correctly, like right after the All-Star break, and then we've heard from Ian Begley, and he said, like, essentially, like, it's not a guarantee right now that he's going to be playing 5-on-5 post All-Star break, and he would personally be concerned about Mitch the rest of the way if he's not playing 5-on-5 at that point. And we just continue to hear mixed things. So I almost don't want to put too many eggs in that basket, even though mentally and emotionally I already have to some extent. But to your point, if he is back, I don't see any reason why they can't play dramatically better defense when he's on the floor. To me, the second question is, like, how much does he actually play? Because I think the rest of the season, he's probably a 15-minute a game guy for the regular season, at least. I think they're going to be incredibly cautious as they have been in ramping him up and reincorporating him. And then there's a question we've all been asking, like, what is the trade-off to having Mitchell Robinson in the starting lineup? Maybe with him and Cat, you're similar to what the Wolves were last year, and you're actually one of the best defenses in basketball, and you're taking off a guy. Presumably, Josh Hart would be the guy off the floor in those lineups who has been like a kind of a mixed bag defensively this year. But is the offense good enough to support that? Can you survive without, like, having that 5-out spacing? And no Dante DiVincenzo to bail you out this year. So those are sort of my lingering questions. It's just how much can you get to the Mitchell Robinson lineup? But I think it might be fair to argue, even if he's playing 15 minutes a game, that might make 2 points. 2 points is $1 a night. That might make all the difference. Like, one play Mitchell Robinson makes that Precious Achiuwa wasn't making or Jericho Sims wasn't making, I think is totally reasonable.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a little, like, I know you just said, like, no Dante to bail you out or whatever, but, like, I also think just because of how things are anecdotally, like, where we kind of look at this thing game to game, and there are certain games where the Knicks just can't seem to make a shot, and it's really frustrating and whatever. Like, for as much as that sort of is the case, they are still 5th in the NBA in 3-point percentage this year. Like, they're still playing quite well in that regard. And then I guess the other thing is that Mitch sort of solves that problem on the days when the shot isn't going in. And, like, we've literally seen that produce I'm trying to remember
Third best offense in the NBA 2 years ago, if that's what you're thinking.
Right. That's exactly the number I was looking for. Yeah. Where they were a top 5 offense with a style that was basically predicated on getting offensive rebounds and, getting Mitchell Robinson basically being the main part of that. Like, Hartenstein was less of a factor that season than he was, last season when he kind of made the turn that eventually got him the big contract and to the Thunder instead of the Knicks. But, like, Mitch was definitely the catalyst of the offensive rebounding and everything that season that helped turn the Knicks into a high-powered offense then. So the way that I look at him is, like, I don't see any way that he is not additive on offense in some ways. And, the nice thing is that now you finally, after all these years, do have another option you can throw out there if for whatever reason a team is exploiting him, if they're hacking him or whatever and putting him on the free throw line, if he gets an offensive rebound, if, his hands just aren't there in one particular game, which sometimes happens. Like, he does have butterfingers sometimes and can't seem to, like, finish around the rim or whatever, whatever the case may be. If he's not having the best game, then sure, you can keep him to, like, 10 minutes that night, just have him spell Cat and then have Cat play the same way that you've been playing the whole season, which is great. You also still have Precious Achiuwa as, sort of a fallback option. But to me, I just look at it. I don't see any way that adding Mitch isn't gonna be a huge thing for this team. Again, should he come back in a timely manner, like I'm sort of no sourcing or anything. I don't know, but just it seems to me like he's trending the right direction. I mean, he's definitely like running at full speed and everything based off what we were seeing like on social media and stuff. Like he looks pretty comfortable. He's clearly in good shape. So I'm kind of more inclined to believe that we're just going to get the first injury report or two after the Knicks get back from the All-Star break. It's going to be like Mitchell Robinson will be on there questionable, and that pretty much means he's going to play. But maybe I'll be wrong about that. But when that does happen, I feel like he's going to definitely be additive to this defense and possibly even to the offense. But I think he's going to help that defense get back in the top 10 again.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think my offensive concerns, and maybe it's contradictory to what I said before, but should be more focused on the playoffs, where 2 years ago they completely fell off, not because of Mitch, but just because of like a total lack of spacing and shooting. And even now, like even if you like I think it's worth reemphasizing this point. Like you could say Mitchell Robinson at center in the starting lineup cuts out their spacing. It's still dramatically better spacing than Mitchell Robinson has played with at any point in his career outside of maybe the Sixers series last year. Once they went to those like having DiVincenzo, Anunoby, I don't know, maybe Bogdanovich, Brunson out with him. Like last year they were able to get to some shooting, but it was only after trading away RJ Barrett that was actually a thing, because before that he was always playing with RJ, he was always playing with Julius, basically two guys that nobody guarded. If right now you have a lineup around him of Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Cat, that is four guys you have to guard behind the arc. And I was going to say, when you noted their fifth in 3-point percentage, I was going to say, my concern is their 27th in 3-point rate. But Mitchell Robinson to Josh Hart doesn't make a huge difference in that, because Josh just does not get up a ton of threes. So there are some arguments for it, beyond the fact that like if he is only playing 15 minutes, that time might not be, likely mostly won't be with the starters. It'll likely be him, like two wings, Payne and Deuce, and those are lineups that can kind of survive the lack of spacing. So to me, it's just a question, like maybe like I'm getting too in depth on this and leading more into my lineup conversation, but I do think it's just a question of how much time and how ready is he to have a big effect. But to your point, if he's in great shape, if he's a little bit leaner, even if it's only 15 minutes a game, that can be more than enough to make a big impact. But Alex, I want to get into my big prediction, which is about the starting lineup. We will talk about that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you know about our friends over at TurboTax. And this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. But now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Gavin, we're back in, going through some big predictions for the back, quote unquote, half of the season here. In fact, not half of a season. I think it's another 20 something games that we're looking at here. They've played 54. That means that there's 28 games left. So yeah, so not quite half, not even close to half. Back third of the season, let's call it. But at any rate, Gavin, you have a fairly shocking prediction as well. So I'll let you get into it.
Yeah, I'll say maybe to use our KFS crossover terminology, not quite ghost pepper territory, but maybe a little hotter than your average jalapeno, just because this isn't something we see Tom Thibideau do. I'm going to say the Knicks make a starting lineup change before the end of the season. I got into the numbers a little bit last week. I think I'm going to get into them maybe even more on tomorrow's show. But just for a broad outline, the New York Knicks starters this year have played 806 minutes. That is nearly 300 minutes more than any other lineup in the NBA. Only 4 lineups have played even half as many minutes. So that is an astounding number. In that time, they are plus 5.9 points per 100 possessions, a 54th percentile lineup, so slightly above average. For context, the Knicks' January lineup last year, Brunson, DiVincenzo, OG, Randall, Ihart, was plus 17.1. So almost 12, or that's not fair. Almost just over 11 points per 100 possessions. Better than what we're seeing from this current starting lineup now with an extremely large sample size. So I won't bore everyone by going over everything I went over last time, but suffice it to say, I think unless you're expecting an individual to make a major leap, and perhaps that's plausible, or just saying like, well, like they're leaving a lot in the tank schematically, and Tom Thibideau has a whole different plan in the playoffs for this group than he has in the regular season. I think we have to acknowledge at this point that is not the starting lineup that is going to win the Knicks a championship. And if you want to push back and you say, hey, I know they've played a ton of minutes, but it's still only 54 games or whatever with OG, 48 games. Like it is just too soon to make that call. I hear you. That's fine. But I keep going back to the idea that I mentioned the stat from our buddy XJ, but that Deuce McBride is in the Knicks' 5 best lineups. And when I went to like some of the plus minuses, right? Like Cat on the season is +8, Deuce is +6, OG is +6, Payne is +5, Precious -7, Brunson -7, Josh Hart -12. I don't look at that and say Brunson and Hart stuck. I think they've probably been 2 of the Knicks' 3 best players this year. I think it is very clear that for them to succeed, they have to be insulated by shooting. And we've seen that basically every single time Karl-Anthony Towns is out or otherwise hampered, this team falls apart because they desperately need that spacing. And to me, Deuce McBride is the very obvious solution to inject spacing into that starting lineup. The only question is, I can make that case till I'm red in the face. Does Tom Thibideau believe that? I think it's plausible, Alex, because typically we don't see him make changes when they're facing live bullets, when they're playing a lot of games. He's always very, very slow to change. But I think with a week off, with a week for the analytics staff to make a case, I have no doubt they've been making to him all season long. I think we could actually see this. But am I too optimistic? Am I out of my mind? Do I not really know our guy, Tommy T?
How brutally honest do you want me to be with that answer?
Yeah, go for it. No, rip me apart. Rip me apart.
Because I don't think there's if I was going to put odds on Deuce McBride ending up in the starting lineup for the Knicks, I would put it at like any time between now and the end of the season, not related to injuries. Let's put it that way. First off,
yeah.
With a fully healthy team, I would put those odds at like plus 10,000. Like, I mean, I feel like it is a very, very slim chance that this happens because I think that Tibbs, I think he loves that starting lineup. I think that barring any sort of injury, he's not going to sway from that. Not to bring it back to my first thing, but I think I think the most likely change, more so than Deuce, would be that Tibbs goes Mike Woodson and goes the East as big man, and throws Mitch and Cat out there if Mitch gets into shape and gets his win back over the first 10 games or so that he's back. Like maybe you get another nick and bruise for OG or for Josh Hart or something, and that forces you to try that lineup out, because I think if we've seen anything, it's that OG's been out for a couple weeks, and it didn't seem like it even crossed his mind to potentially throw Deuce McBride out there, and that's without OG Anunoby and with Precious Achiuwa, who has had his ups and downs as far as how well he's fit with that starting lineup. Like I think he's had some fairly good games, but I think that for the most part he shows his best ball once Cat goes off the floor and he could kind of shift to the 5. And yet Tibbs doesn't seem to believe that. Like Tibbs, in the face of the choice of go bigger or go smaller, he is pretty much always going to choose go bigger. At least I think, based off historical precedent and everything else. Like the only times where he's sort of gone against those expectations are when the talent is just way too much to justify it. To justify going big rather than just going with the most talented players. And I think OG is the perfect example of that. Although OG also plays big, like he, especially on defense, can guard like a Giannis Antetokounmpo very competently, which I think is what matters to Tibbs a lot there. And then he says, well, I don't really give a crap what you do on offense. Like, I mostly need to know that you can guard those big fours on defense. And, if you're then moving like Josh Hart to the bench, then you're saying, okay, Deuce McBride and Jalen Brunson are now my guys up top. And then that means that, OG can still guard those fours, I guess. But I just feel like he's going to then look at that and be like, but what about the threes or whatever? And then you put Mikal Bridges on. Okay, but what about the bigger twos? I feel like he would just keep going up the line and being like, but what if there's a 6'5" guy out there? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't deal with this. So yeah, maybe I'm kind of projecting a little bit of like the old Tibbs here or whatever, but I think that he only makes those sort of that seismic of a move if there's like a gun to his head, more or less. And if he's like very much forced to, either by injury or by circumstance, like the Knicks last year being like, we don't care what you think, you're going to play Josh Hart as your backup four. And then he did it because that's the only option that was presented to him based off roster construction. So, yeah, I think regardless of what the numbers say, I mean, maybe he warms up to the idea of closing with Deuce from time to time, but I don't think he's going to start him. I don't think so.
Yeah, you gave me some truth serum, I would agree with probably 95% of what you just said, which is why I left it open-ended and I did not say Deuce McBride would be the starter, even though I just made the case for that, because to me that is the obvious decision. I do think there's a world where Mitchell Robinson is a starter, because Tom Thibideau, I always say this about him, he likes his binky, he likes his safety blankets, and I don't know if Mitch is that, just like in the same way Isaiah Hartenstein was, because Hartenstein just did, like Mitch, you get some high IQ plays you didn't used to get. Like, remember last year, like he had the play where was it Maxey who he chucked it off of out of balance, like falling out, like that was crazy. Shout out to Mitch. He is not the same guy he used to be. His foul rate is down. He's a much smarter player than he was early in his career, but I don't think Tom Thibideau looks at him as being super reliable, because he can't make free throws and does not finish around the basket as well as he used to. And also, to your point, just his butter hands on certain days. That being said, I do think he gives you that defensive insulation that Tom Thibideau is typically looking for. So that is probably the more likely change of the two. I think I want to live in a world where Tibbs accepts what I see as reality, that the Knicks starting lineup just isn't good enough. And I would go so far as to say it would be a borderline fireable offense if they don't make some kind of change and this continues and the Knicks lose in whatever, like 5 or 6 games in the second round. And that's not me saying that like making that lineup change would make the Knicks better than the Celtics or favorites against the Celtics. I think it's just that when all the numbers scream that you are a substantially better basketball team, when Deuce McBride is on the floor and Josh Hart, despite everything he's been doing well this year, is a minus 12 per 100 possessions, that suggests to me you should probably make a change. And the great thing about making that change is Josh Hart can still play 34 minutes. Like you just change your sub patterns. You put him in for one of Mikal or OG. I think it ensures that everyone is a little bit fresher. Hot hand theory, I'll give them a lot of credit. They've been talking about this a lot. The way when you have all three wings starting, it just limits the shifts you can make throughout a game and the lineups you can get to. And I think it would be really good for them to get to some of those cat in the bench lineups that I'll save the conversation for another day, because it's a long one, but the numbers for basically when you put Cat out there with Payne, Deuce, and like 1 or 2 of the wings, they play like one of the best teams in the NBA. So ideally they would lean into that, but we'll see if it actually happens.
Yes, we will. And I don't have too much more to add to that. So we got 2 more predictions, 2 little bite-sized ones for you guys in the final segment. So we're going to talk about if the Knicks could have multiple All-NBA guys after having multiple All-Stars, and also if the Knicks could potentially insert their way into the top 2 seed conversation again. So all that's coming up in just a moment on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've had this ongoing problem. I just don't have the time between work, life, doing a podcast 5 to 6 to 7 days a week, and trying to eat healthier. I was constantly feeling stressed out. I'd go to the grocery store, buy things I don't need, and then end up with no time to actually cook them. And sticking to my health goals, man, that was a struggle too. But everything changed when I discovered Hungry Root. Honestly, it's been a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all that stress. With Hungry Root, it's like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one. They take care of my grocery shopping, recommending meals and groceries based on my tastes and health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. And the best part, every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. I'm talking quick, healthy meals that actually taste great, all delivered straight to my door. It's been a huge time saver and has made eating healthy so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA. Don't miss out. All right, we are back to make our third and final prediction, our second individually, third and fourth overall. Math is tough sometimes. Alex, what's your last one?
My last one involves a little bit of simple math, so don't worry. Nothing too crazy here. So the Knicks post All-Star break in the Tibbs era, in the years where they made the playoffs. So I'm gonna rule out the ill-fated 21 to 22 season, which we'll all just choose to collectively forget about. But in the Tibbs era, in the times that they have made the playoffs, the Knicks have finished 17-10 post All-Star break in 23 to 24. They have finished 14-8 in 22 to 23, and they finished 22-13 in 20 to 21. Now, those winning percentages in order are, I rounded within a fraction of a decimal point, but 63% of their games in 23-24, 64% of their games in 22-23, and 63% of their games in 20 to 21. So in years when the Knicks are good and they make the playoffs, you can generally bank on them winning 63 to 64% of their games in the back third of the season after the All-Star break. So if you take that data and you figure out with the 28 games remaining for the Knicks, what 63% looks like, it's about 18 wins for them, which would make them a 54-win team this year if that very reliable 63% number holds out. 54 wins, it's a little hard to look back too far because 2 years obviously were screwed up by COVID. And speaking of math being hard, I didn't feel like going through and extrapolating win percentages and figuring out what those would have equaled over the course of a full 82-game season, because it just wasn't worth that much effort. But 2 out of the last 3 years, 54 wins would have gotten you the 2 seed in the East. So maybe they get it, maybe they don't. But maybe it ends up like that. The third year there, which it featured a 54-win team as the 3 seed, that was Philly, the year that Milwaukee and Boston were number 1 and 2. So, maybe that's the Knicks' fate this year. Maybe they're just behind 2 teams that are too good. I don't think the Cavs at this point are going to fall back to earth enough, but the Celtics have looked, outside of when they play the Knicks, have looked a little more human lately. So maybe they don't win 63% of their games the rest of the way out. Maybe they win like 57% of their games or something like that. And then the Knicks are able to make up the few games that separate them at the moment and take that 2 seed.
Yeah, I'm going to call this one about maybe a little less bold than my lineup change, just because Tom Thibideau is a stubborn man, but I would call this extremely bold. Boston, I didn't realize this, to be fair, but I saw shout out, I think it was Shane Young who had the stat. They actually have had a higher net rating this year than they did last season, and some of their overall stats are not as good just because the rest of the league is better, but they've been playing really good basketball going to the All-Star break. So I just don't see it as super likely that the Knicks have played them. I am, it's an unfortunate fact for someone who hosts a Knicks podcast, but I am just a big believer in the Boston Celtics. I think they stay ahead of the Knicks, and then just too big of a gap with the Cavs, who seem to be at the very least one of the better regular season teams in recent memory. One of the better regular season teams, honestly, in NBA history. I know that sounds like a stretch, but you look at the net rating, you look at some of the numbers they put together. So I don't really see it. But there's a world where Mitchell Robinson comes back and everything just clicks into place for this Knicks team. And you see a run like January of last year. And I think that's what we're all waiting for. And that's what we thought we were starting when they beat all those West Coast teams at home. And I think that energy was smothered a little bit by how they lost to the Celtics. But there's a world where Mitch comes back and maybe it all clicks into place. I'll give you my bold prediction real quick, my last one. It is that for the first time in over 50 seasons since 1970, 1971, the Knicks will have two players make first or second team All-NBA. Clyde and Willis both made second team back in 71. So my quick first draft at this was Jokic, Tatum, Giannis, Donovan Mitchell, SGA, first team. Worth noting on Giannis, the Bucks have 29 games left, and he has to play in 24 of them. He is dealing with, I believe, a calf injury, if I'm remembering correctly. He's supposed to be back post-All-Star break, but that can linger. You would expect Milwaukee to be really cautious with him. There's also a world where if Milwaukee's locked into their seed, he misses a game or two at the end of the season. So I would say it's far from a guarantee that Giannis is on there. So that opens up a first-team spot. I think Jalen Brunson has had as good or better of a season than Donovan Mitchell. I do think Mitchell will be rewarded for how good the Cavs are, which is totally fair. SGA, Tatum, Jokic, all locks. Second team, I had Kat, Jaren Jackson Jr., Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Edwards, Jalen Brunson. I don't think this one is particularly bold, Alex. Like I was kind of struggling. I was going through the names. I was going through the numbers. I was struggling to see a great candidate who could bump either of those guys off, just because I think their case is about as strong as any of those other guys on the second team. The one person I'd make an argument for is maybe someone like Cade Cunningham over Kat. I just think he's going to have to do this for another year to get second team type recognition. And I also think it's a great sign that ESPN did I just, of course, clicked out of it, their straw poll, their MVP straw poll, and both Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns were top 8 on that. On top of both being all-star starters, like it all kind of leads me to the idea that there's a very good chance they both finish top 10 in all-NBA voting as well.
Yeah, I don't think I actually think that's not super bold. I'm kind of with you. I think that's pretty realistic. I also, honestly, if I was a betting man, I'm not betting on Giannis playing 24 out of 29 games down the stretch either. Like, I mean, he's already dealing with an injury. Like, they're probably going to be more focused on getting him ready for the playoffs at this point. He's probably at this point in his career more focused on that too, and would care a little less about another all NBA on his resume, when potentially he's trying to make what could be like one of his last chances at a run with Milwaukee here. At least as things are currently constructed with all that they've invested in this team. So yeah, I think there's a very real chance that he does not end up getting that. In which case, I mean, whether it's Brunson, whether it's Towns, probably just depends on how each of them plays the rest of the way out. But I could see one of those two potentially taking that other first team spot now that it's positionless, and potentially moving into Giannis's spot there. I mean, if Brunson keeps playing how he was shortly before the All-Star break, then it's probably him. And just, I think on name, I don't know if I'll call it name brand recognition, but just like perceived role with the Knicks and whatever, like he's the alpha. I mean, he even Karl Towns like defers to him, calls him Cap all the time, is always like very deferential to his teammate. So I think that maybe he gets it just based off that merit. But if Cat comes out and has a second half of the season that's or second third of the season, whatever, that's akin to how he started the season, where he made his case for All-Star and like got all the votes that he did for that, like, and really was starting to get some, I would say, more heavy MVP buzz, earlier in the season, then maybe it's him that, steps in there and takes that spot on the first team. But I could see a world where one of them's on the first team, one of them's on the second team. I think no matter what, they've at least secured that. No matter how the votes fall at this point, I think the Knicks have two all NBA guys, period. But I think that your prediction that they'll both end up within the first or second team is probably accurate. I just don't see how it could really fall any other way, especially just considering the games played minimums and all that stuff. Like, I think that that's going to factor in too. And there will be some players that are really good, but just didn't play as much, and ultimately don't get to be considered for those honors. And that'll help Brunson and Cat out too, who have both been fairly durable, all things considered, this year.
All right. That's an optimistic note to end on. We'll call it there. He's Alex. Gavin, we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.